setting targets, hitting targets. Let's start with, setting the targets, how you view doing that. Should the bar be high? Should it be, a minimum stabbing point? I think it'd be interesting to start with Molly on this one, based off of some of the comments in our prep call. What would you say to this, Molly?
I think it goes back to like this idea of the culture that I spoke about at the beginning. Mindset's really important in a job where the reality is the majority of their day, of an SDR's day, is spent facing rejection. When we first came to EMEA, we intentionally had our SDR targets set low. We would have rather that they would be overachieved and over exceeded rather than they fall short. Honestly, I personally don't understand it. If someone could explain it to me, that would be great. But I don't understand when companies have SDRs who are constantly missing their quota, because you've got to look at it, right? It's either one of two things. It's one, the quota's too high, or two, the SDR it has a gap in their learning and they need coaching. But when it's a pattern and it's clear that it's a whole team, quotas should be a minimum. Quotas should be a minimum expectation to be hit. From a management perspective, also, that just is going to help you with your forecasting, rather than it being, well, our team has quoted at XYZ, and they're told that's what their OTE is, but actually they never reach that because that quota is really high. That just creates disillusionment with the SDR, doesn't really make them feel valued. They're not going to get job satisfaction because they're not hitting their quotas. I'm not saying make quotas easy to hit. What I'm saying is that quotas should be a minimum hit. So, and that should be the mentality that you always have the SDRs. It should be hard to hit, don't get me wrong. It should not be happening, 2 weeks into the month. It should be difficult. But I think when you step back and if your whole team is missing quota, and it's kind of just been accepted as the norm, I think something needs to change, personally.
Yes, triple underline every word you said. That can Sam, can you just snippet that out, and that can be a forever answer to how to set the quota, because that's going to be more eloquently put than what I'm about to say. But I have two really interesting things to say, just adding on to Molly. One, if you set the SDR quota a little bit lower, yeah, you might overcompensate your SDRs, but look at an organization like Outreach. They just got 200 million in the bank in an amazing, sexy fundraising round. Congratulations. Paying an SDR a few hundred extra bucks to give them that confidence to be successful is a drop in the bucket. And maybe you don't have 200 million in the bank, but still, would you rather have someone be overly successful and confident, or under successful and looking for a new job elsewhere? That's the kind of thought process you should be thinking through. And oh God, my SDRs are on this chat. Oh, well, they can know. We experimented with quota setting at Postclick. Sorry, team, y'all are gonna hear this. Guess what? You're experimented on. Last quarter, we intentionally set quotas a little bit higher than we could have to see what would have happened. And we actually saw lower success. This quarter, we intentionally set quotas a little bit lower than we thought was reasonable. And you know what's really interesting? They are overachieving this quarter on last quarter's quota. And the quota is set lower this quarter, right? We reduced the quota from last quarter to this quarter, and they are overproducing this quarter than what they were doing the previous quarter's quota. Think about that. We lowered the goals and they're overproducing. And so I hope that's a really good, if you're okay, well, I want to nickel and dime my sales org. And I'm what the hell, what's wrong with you? But assuming you still don't believe you shouldn't nickel and dime your sales org, use Postclick SDRs as an example, use Molly's amazing snippet as an example. When you set quotas lower, you see overperformance over the targets you actually need. It's a really cool psychological effect. I'm not an expert in it, but it works.
I don't really have much to add. I think that there's also the viewpoint of higher level leadership, where you want to look at how many demos do you need, and what's your conversion rate to opportunity, and what's your opportunity what's your win rate, and then sort of doing that back math of okay, well, this is the revenue that the business requires for this quarter. and whether those quotas. So I think like KPIs and quotas are a bit different, admittedly, because for me, quotas are determined by what the business requires, and the KPIs are like what are the actions that someone needs to take to get there. So I think it's a lot of looking into like the data and another piece of that tech stack puzzle, right? Like you have Salesforce, having the ability to look into like, what are those conversion numbers looking like? And then a lot of the time, that's how you determine headcount too, is doing the back math from that revenue. It comes back to Sam's point, like, what is the reason you're having these SDRs? Is it just so you have this overpaid call center, or is it to develop real pipeline, or is it to get to your business targets that you need from a revenue perspective? I think sometimes, and there was a question that was asked about like, how like the SDR sometimes don't feel part of the business, right? Like, I think if you can help them understand how critical they are to the actual revenue machine, like there's a lot of sales orgs who will celebrate like a big month and they'll call out the top AEs and this and that. The reality is those AEs got their demos from somewhere. And a lot of these AEs didn't necessarily prospect themselves. And especially in this world, and we're moving more and more towards this sales development, where those meetings did come from the SDRs. So I think it's trying to understand what you need from a revenue target and doing that back math. But I like what Sam's saying about pressure testing different quotas and seeing sort of what the like what someone's appetite for success truly looks like.